Madame Bimbo was known in the city of Lagos as a miracle worker with her needle and thread. People lined up every day, waiting for her to curate the perfect dresses for weddings, parties, and other functions. It was not just that she made beautiful designs. She made real designs that no one had ever seen in the world. And she was the fastest tailor they had ever seen. A dress that took other tailors weeks or even months, Madame Bimbo completed in just 1 hour. Yes, you heard that right. 1 hour you would come into her shop and she would take your measurements, and by the time you return, your outfit with a real design that no one else has was ready for you. Or sometimes you could sit there and wait while she sewed your clothes. No one asked any questions because they were getting what no one else could give them. But there was one rule: you must never, under any circumstance, try on your clothes in her shop. Madame Bimbo's tailoring shop stood at the edge of a bustling market. Her reputation was legendary. People traveled from far and wide to have her curate custom dresses that were unlike anything they had ever worn before. It wasn't just her designs that drew people in. It was her speed. Madame Bimbo could do it within an hour. Her designs were magical. Her ability to create clothes that fit perfectly was unbelievable. And she would deliver your dress the same day. But as impressive as her work was, there was one rule that you could never break: no trying on clothes in the shop. People accepted it without hesitation. They were too blinded by the convenience and beauty of her work. She was not like any other tailor shop where customers could go into a fitting room to check if their dresses were well fitted or needed adjustments. No, Madame Bimbo would take your exact measurements, crafted the clothes with incredible precision, and then handed it to you in a beautifully wrapped package. Her customers would take the package home and tried on their dresses in their homes. And once left the shop, there were no bringing dresses back because the dresses always fit so perfectly. Some people gossiped about her rule behind her back, but no one complained because they got their clothes quicker than other tailors. Other tailors in the city were very jealous of Madame Bimbo. She took all the customers away from them. Her shop was always full, with the line spilling outside and around the shop, until one day. It was a bright sunny afternoon when Amaka entered Madame Bimbo's shop, accompanied by her 2 friends, Kemi and Ify. Amaka was there to pick up a dress she had ordered for her cousin's wedding. She had told her friends about Madame Bimbo's skills and speed, and they couldn't believe the stories they had heard. Was it really possible for a tailor to make such perfect clothes so quickly? Could Madame Bimbo really make a dress in an hour? They asked when they entered the shop. Ify's jaw dropped. The shop was full of the most beautiful clothes they had ever seen. The dresses on display shimmered like they were made from silk and diamonds. Beautiful gowns, traditional wrappers, and modern designs adorned the mannequins. Kemi was shocked as she ran her fingers lightly across the delicate embroidery on a dress. "Whoa! I can't believe I have never seen anything like this," Kemi said. "We should get our measurements taken too. I want a dress for my sister's wedding. I told you, Amaka whispered back, feeling proud. And just wait until you see how fast she walks. Madame Bimbo was busy measuring a young lady when they walked in, but she quickly looked up and greeted them with a warm smile. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and hands that moved like lightning. There was something calm and kind about her face, but something in her eyes seemed to be always constantly watching to make sure everyone obeyed her rule. Amaka walked up to Madame Bimbo. I am here to pick up my dress. Madame Bimbo, I can't wait to see it. Madame Bimbo nodded and walked into a back room. She returned almost instantly, holding a dress wrapped in a beautiful silk bag. It's all ready, dear, Madame Bimbo said, handing the bag to Amaka. Remember the rule, no trying it on here. Amaka smiled, nodding. Of course, madam, I will try it on at home. Kemi, on the other hand, admired the clothes so much that she wanted one for herself, and they were ready to wait for an hour to take the dress home with them. Madame Bimbo grabbed her tape measurements and measured Kemi. While Madame Bimbo was busy with Kemi's measurements, Ify walked towards a little corner, curious about the mysterious rule. As Amaka and Kemi distracted Madame Bimbo, Ify spotted a beautiful green beaded dress on a mannequin. Oh my goodness! I love this. I think it will fit me very well. Ify thought to herself. She wanted the dress, but she did not want to buy without trying it on. As Kemi was admiring the dress, another customer who was beside her whispered, "Are you seriously going to try that on?" Her eyes wide. You know the rule. I don't see why it's such a big deal. Ify replied, shrugging. It's just a dress. I will try it on. If it fits, I will buy it. If not, I will then put it back. Nobody will even notice. Without thinking twice, Ify snuck into a corner between two mannequins where Madame Bimbo cannot see her, and she wore the dress on top of her own dress. But as soon as she put it on, something strange happened. A chill ran down her spine, and the energy in the room felt different. Immediately, something was off. She froze and looked up to see if Madame Bimbo noticed the change in the room. Madame Bimbo felt a sharp pain shoot through her hands, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Her hand trembled uncontrollably. The measuring tape she was using on Femi fell from her fingers. Her instinct screamed that something terrible had happened. Slowly, she looked up and turned her head towards the corner. When her eyes landed on Ify, hiding between the mannequins, wearing the dress, everything inside Madame Bimbo screamed, "No! What have you done?" Madame Bimbo screamed. Her voice was filled with terror, and her once calm and composed face twisted into rage. She rushed towards Ify, her hands shaking so violently she could barely keep her balance. Amaka and Kemi were shocked as Madame Bimbo charged towards Ify. She pushed everything and everyone out of her way. "What have you done?" Madame Bimbo screamed, pulling the dress off her shoulders with trembling hands. You have finished me. You have ruined everything. Get out. You must leave. Get out now, she screamed as she kicked all of them out of the shop. Her body trembling, her voice cracking. Her voice echoed through the shop, sending shivers down everyone's spine. Amaka and Kemi stood numb too, shocked to move. Madame Bimbo had always been so calm and kind. They had never seen her so upset. With tears in her eyes, Madame Bimbo turned to them, her voice filled with pain. You all, you have to leave. All of you, get out of my shop. The three friends left the shop, confused and shaking. Madame Bimbo's anger had left them speechless. They couldn't understand what had just happened. Why was the rule so important? Why did Madame Bimbo look so terrified? Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Madame Bimbo's hands, once steady and skilled, started to shake uncontrollably. At first, she tried to ignore it, but the shaking only got worse. She couldn't sew like she used to, and her stitches began to fall apart. The dresses that once fit perfectly were now loose and crooked. Every stitch she attempted to make fell apart. It took weeks to even finish one cloth. Her customers began to complain bitterly because they were used to bringing their fabrics and receiving their dresses in 1 hour. She was struggling a lot to even get one dress done. Words began to spread throughout the town, but no one dared to speak openly about it. Gossip circulated like wildfire. Have you heard? What happened to Madame Bimbo? She's cursed. Her hands are swollen like balloons, and her shop is empty. Many customers stopped going to her shop. The line she used to have around her shop was gone. Few weeks later, her fingers and hands had swallowed so much she couldn't do anything with her hands. Her hands were now blackened, big lumps, and the pain was unbearable. Every time she looked at them, she was reminded of the rule Ify had broken. Years ago, when she was a young tailor, struggling to be successful, Madame Bimbo had made a deal with a spirit. She had begged for success, for the power to make clothes and designs that no one else could make. Rare designs that would bring her customers from far and wide. The spirit had granted her wish, but in return, she had to agree to one rule. No one could ever try on the clothes in her shop, and the spirit had warned her if anyone break the rule, her gift would be taken away and she would lose everything. She had not thought much of it back then because it seemed like a simple rule to follow. But now, because of Ify's curiosity, the rule had been broken. Day by day, her hands that were so skilled and graceful were now swollen and covered in blisters and sores. The skin rotted, and soon maggots crawled out of the disgusting wounds. The sight was horrifying, and the smell was unbearable. Madame Bimbo was in so much pain, but there was no cure for her suffering. Desperate and out of options, she went back to the man who had helped her gain the sewing powers in the first place, but there was no help for her. Every night, she cried herself to sleep, knowing she was losing everything she had worked for: her shop, her reputation, her dream, it was all going away. One evening, Amaka couldn't stand it anymore. She felt guilty for what had happened to Madame Bimbo. She knew it was Ify who had broken the rule, but she still felt responsible. She decided to visit Madame Bimbo, hoping to apologize. When she arrived at the shop, the door was unlocked, but the shop was empty. The beautiful dresses that had once filled the shelves were gone. The walls were empty, and the room felt cold and airy. Amaka called for Madame Bimbo, her voice echoing in the silence. "Madame Bimbo, are you here?" She heard a faint sound from the back room and slowly walked towards it. When she opened the door, she gasped. Madame Bimbo was sitting on the floor, her hands covered in bandages, her face pale and tired. She looked up at Amaka. Her eyes were filled with sorrow. I came to say I am sorry," Amaka whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Madame Bimbo shook her head with a sad smile on her face. "It's not your fault, child. It was bound to happen, sooner or later. The spirit has come for what it gave to me." Amaka's heart ached as she looked at Madame Bimbo, the woman who had once been so strong and proud, now reduced to this. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how Madame Bimbo became a recluse, hiding in her own shop, away from the prying eyes of the people. She knew there was no escaping her fate. The spirit had given her a gift, but she had failed to protect it. A month later, Amaka couldn't stop thinking about Madame Bimbo. Every time she looked at the beautiful dress she had picked up that day, her mind wandered back to the woman who had made it. Madame Bimbo had been kind and talented, and her downfall weighed heavily on Amaka's heart. She couldn't shake the image of Madame Bimbo's swollen, painful hands and the despair she had seen in her eyes. No one else had come to visit her or check on her, and Amaka realized that if anyone was going to help, it had to be her. So, after gathering some strength herself, she went back to Madame Bimbo's shop and gently knocked on the door. "Madame Bimbo, it's me, Amaka. Please, let me in," she said softly. After a long pause, she heard shuffling footsteps approaching. Madame Bimbo opened the door, her eyes swollen from tears, her face pale and worn out. She was clearly too weak to stand on her own. Without another word, Amaka stepped in carefully, helping her to sit down, and she could see Madame Bimbo's hand wrapped in clothes, but still visibly swollen and covered in sores that hadn't started to heal. "You can't go on like this, Ma. We are going to get you help," Amaka said firmly, holding her hand. Madame Bimbo, barely able to resist, Amaka gently helped her up, and they took a taxi to the nearest hospital. When they arrived, the doctors were stunned by the sight of her inflamed, damaged hands. They examined her carefully, whispering among themselves. This level of swelling and sores was something they had rarely seen, and it made them wonder if something deeper was going on. What could have caused this? One of the doctors murmured. As they began to treat the sores with the strongest ointment and medications they had, despite their best efforts, Madame Bimbo's hand didn't respond quickly to the treatments. Days passed, but the wounds remained stubbornly unhealed, as though an invisible weight kept them from improving. Feeling helpless but determined, Amaka decided it was time to bring in more than just medical support. She knew Madame Bimbo had always been deeply spiritual, so she reached out to a few pastors she knew from her church. Explaining the situation to them, they agreed to come and pray for Madame Bimbo. The pastors arrived at Madame Bimbo's room early the next morning. With their anointing oil, they began to pray fervently over her, seeking to break any curse that might have been cast upon her. Every day, Amaka sat with Madame Bimbo through every session of the prayer and treatments, encouraging her to stay strong. The pastors prayed over her hands, her heart, and her mind, lifting her spirit each time they spoke. They even prayed over the entire shop, moving from room to room, blessing each corner to get rid of any lingering darkness. The prayer continued for days, with Amaka staying close, giving comfort and reassurance. Slowly, the swelling in Madame Bimbo's hands began to decrease, and the sores started to close up. The doctors, witnessing the surprising recovery, were so surprised. They knew it was a miracle, and Madame Bimbo herself was very surprised to see her hands gradually returning to normal. For the first time in weeks, she could move her fingers without pain, and the sores had almost completely faded. The curse had finally been lifted, and Madame Bimbo's health was restored. Once she was fully healed, Amaka gently suggested that it might be time for Madame Bimbo to reopen her tailor shop. Amaka, I don't know, Madame Bimbo insisted, looking away. After everything that happened, I doubt anyone wants to come back. People are probably too afraid or angry to step foot in that place again. Amaka understood her fear, but she wasn't ready to give up on the shop that had been a part of their lives for so long. Let me help you, Amaka urged, placing a hand on Madame Bimbo's shoulder. We can make a fresh start. I will stand in as the new owner, and you can walk alongside me. We will show people that the shop is safe, that the rules are gone, and they can try on their clothes in the shop. Madame Bimbo still looked unsure, but Amaka's persistence gave her some courage. They decided to go back to the shop together, with Amaka ready to take charge and bring back their old customers. Amaka reached out to her two close friends, Ify and Kemi, explaining the plan and asking for their help. Both women were more than willing to pitch in. For the first few weeks, Amaka, Ify, and Kemi worked tirelessly to convince people to return to the shop. They assured everyone that Madame Bimbo was doing well, that no harm would come to anyone who visited the shop, and that the old rules were gone for good. The shop was reopened and welcoming, with a new look in a no rules. And Madame Bimbo, though a bit nervous, started to join in with her sewing skills, assisting Amaka as her quiet partner. At first, customers were hesitant, peeking into the shop, but not fully stepping inside. Some would look around and whispered to each other, uncertain about whether the curse was truly gone. Amaka, courageous, remained patient and welcoming, greeting everyone with warmth and inviting them to try the shop services again. She and her friends assured the customers that nothing strange would happen and that Madame Bimbo was just a regular tailor who had gone through a tough time. As time passed, the persistence of Amaka and her friends began to pay off slowly but surely. People returned placing their orders and trusting the shop once more. Surprisingly to them, Madame Bimbo was still great and making rare and stunning designs, but she needed days to make each outfit. The customers were happy with it because they got beautiful designs that no other tailor in the town could make. Amaka hired more tailors so the customers could get their outfits faster. It was as if a fresh energy had washed over the place, restoring life to the once feared tailor shop. With Amaka's support and encouragement, Madame Bimbo began to regain her confidence. Though she wasn't the face of the shop anymore, she was grateful to be part of it, seeing the business thrive once again. Together, Amaka, Madame Bimbo, and the team rebuilt the shop's reputation. Eventually, the shop became busier than ever. Amaka's persistence and dedication paid off, and people from all over the town returned, trusting in the shop's new management and the warmth that filled the place. Amaka had given Madame Bimbo a second chance, not just at her business, but at her life. And Madame Bimbo, filled with gratitude, was content to walk behind the scenes, knowing that she had a true friend who had stood by her when everyone had left. So, if you walked into a shop and there had rules like this, would you stay there for their services or would you leave? Leave your response in the comments section. If you found this story interesting, click the link to watch more interesting stories. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment on this story. Thanks, and God bless you. See you in the next story. Bye.